Mhm.
Dear friends, it's a joy and a privilege to be with you again for another edition of Faith and Works, pulling from the text in the book of James that says, faith without works is dead. As I said when we began these are intended to be a series of conversations and learnings that will stir us up to good works and to love. They may be provocative, and they ought to be. Christians can't be who they need to be unless they are provoked and stirred up in the very best ways to be who God has invited us to be. What precipitated these, of course, was a number of streams of sort of tragic and overwhelming events that came together. Coronavirus, of course, poignant instances of social unrest in response to poignant instances of apparent unjust treatment of people, some by law enforcement. But in the background of all of that is the ongoing conversation that that racism and white supremacies are realities in our world and in our time, and they have been for a long time. My guest today is Brother Sam Rodriguez, and Sam is a member of the West Ohio Conference Connectional Ministry staff. His primary portfolio, as I understand it, is around faith formation and community engagement. And so, Brother Sam, welcome to this time of conversation. And why don't you background us a little bit on who you are and how you serve Christ in this particular time?
Okay, thank you, Bishop Palmer. My background is that I grew up in the United Methodist Church, primarily in Spanish-speaking churches of the Rio Grande Annual Conference. So my experience was limited to that for many years, actually until my mid-30s, when I first became a member of a non-Hispanic church in Midland, Texas. I have been serving the church a year since that date. I was asked to serve in a district position in Hispanic ministries, and have been working since then in different positions around the country, actually, in a conference and also in discipleship ministries in Path 1. And here today, I am at the West Ohio Annual Conference, enjoying a new position that has allowed me to do what I enjoy, and that is to see transformation among our local churches.
And in your role, you are not niched to a specific racial, ethnic, or language group. You serve the whole conference.
Exactly, and I gotta say, I am happy about that. I enjoyed my many years of specific Hispanic Latino ministries, but I also felt that I had a little bit more to offer, and that I could actually be a little bit more comprehensive in my leadership in reaching other communities other than Hispanic Latinos.
Well, listen, thanks for being in West Ohio and for what you're doing and your vision for the ways in which congregations can be renewed, refreshed, and transformed to do the mission. And so you grew up in Texas. And so let me cut to the chase around some of the stereotypes around racism and our prejudices. And I want to say, in fairness to everybody, to Sam, to me, and to our audience, that I have heard people of every hue in America make comments about people whose deepest roots are in Mexico or Latin or Central America. And I've heard that from people in my skin color, and I've heard that from Anglo sisters and brothers, and I suspect that within the community of Latina folks, sometimes there's some commentary that's based on sociology that happens. I know that happens among African Americans for sure, as I've said on other occasions. But one of the things of prejudice, and one of our isms, is this assumption in America that everyone that is Hispanic or Latinx or whose roots are in Latin America are not native-born Americans. Can you speak to that and how that has intersected with your life, that perception?
Sure. I am a second generation. My parents are from Mexico, and indeed, it was not until I really started serving the church where I realized that we were all pegged into this one immigrant mindset and overall umbrella of Hispanic, that we were all the same. And I did not learn the huge differences between me and my brother and sister from Puerto Rico or any other place in South America or Mexico, Central America, until I was in my mid 30s maybe, and it was an eye-opening experience. Growing up in El Paso, Texas, one of the largest border cities with Juarez, Mexico in the world, was an experience in itself, in that is such a contextualized setting. So ever since I grew up, the majority of the population was Mexican or Mexican American in El Paso. So again, I was encapsulated, so to speak, in this one context where I just didn't realize until I said earlier in my mid 30s that there's a whole other world of Hispanic people, and they're not all alike. We don't like the same foods. Not every Hispanic likes spicy food. No matter how much you try to ask a person from Peru to enjoy spicy food, most of the time they're not going to like it.
Wow.
And so those, and other countries for that matter. So that the experience of growing there really narrowed my view of the world until I left El Paso as a young adult, married with my wife, Demetria.
Sure. So the sort of shrinking of the world in one sense, though it sounds like it was a wonderful birthing and incubator and nurturing environment, is twofold. And I want you to correct me if I'm wrong. One, you grew up around more people that looked like you than didn't look like you. So then you went into a wider world and everybody was not brown, for example. And then the other sort of, let me say, shock to the system, and you can correct that terminology if that's, if something's more preferred, was that not all people with, let me say, Latin American roots, for lack of a better word, shared all the same experiences. Is that
Correct.
fair?
Yeah, yes, that is correct. And part of it was also the learning of how I had a different mindset from my brother and sister from any other country in Latin America, in terms of what it was to be a Hispanic in this country, what it was to do ministry in this country as well, because it is very different for someone to come in from another country and try to do ministry the way they were doing it, say in Mexico or in Honduras. So it, there was a difference that had to be identified, and but it tends to bring division when one starts speaking of the generational differences, because it seems like we're departing from ourselves, but we're really not. We're just experience a very different world from childhood if you're born in this country, and as opposed to being born in another country.
I'm with you. I'm with you. So the filters or lenses for doing ministry are different if you're born in the U.S. versus, let's say, if you immigrate from Mexico or Puerto Rico, et cetera. Wow. Wow.
Yes, very different.
Can you say a bit more about how that's nuanced?
Let's see. Well, one of the things that actually, this is kind of funny. One of the things that I've learned from my brothers and sisters from other countries is, for instance, the idea of solidarity. The idea of we do things together, we don't stand out, we don't go out on our own. And there had been a few times where my individualistic way of thinking, having been born in this country, collided with the idea of solidarity with my brothers and sisters. So if I pulled myself out of a particular meeting, it appeared to them that I was not interested in what was going on because I had walked away to do something else or didn't participate in a particular thing for whatever reason. So that had been brought up to my attention. So I took that into consideration and always made my best effort to make sure that they understood why I might not be participating in a certain thing. Granted, a lot of times that has to do with personal preference and personal identity. In my case, I am an introvert, so there's times when I do need to step away. So it was never about not wanting to participate. Mostly it was about just having a little time to myself.
I'm with you. I'm with you. So, I'm concluding in part, no conclusions because I'm not that smart, but culture, even specific culture of a specific large group of people, is layered. And
Definitely.
is that fair to say? Yeah.
Yeah, it's very layered. And then you got to take into consideration the layers among each of those countries and their customs. And
Yeah.
so it is complicated, to say the
Yes.
least.
Yeah, yeah. So, you're one of the people that is engaged in cultural learning and competency. You've got some capacity to help individuals and churches do that. And what are some things that we need to keep in mind, even if we're not in a formal program, just to be better at community, understanding diversity? What are those lenses that say, God, help me to be culturally wise?
Well, interestingly enough, one of the most important things that I've learned over the years is that uh, so often we have these misunderstandings, stereotypes of each other because we never hang around each other. We're never in the same place. Many communities are surrounded by people who look different than they are, but there's never any fellowship. So that's the main thing, just the not knowing who your neighbor is a
Mhm.
big,
Mhm.
big challenge.
Mhm.
And until we are willing to interface, if you will, with our neighbor, no matter where they're from, we're not going to be able to widen our understanding of humanity in general and of God.
Mhm. Mhm. So neighboring is everything in one sense.
Yes, as is relationships for us to foster. If we could have relationships that are very superficial, those will not teach us very much because those are only those things that we see, hear, touch, and feel.
Mhm.
When we have more profound relationships, we start getting into the heart of a person's love for either or love and dreams and convictions. When you are listening to somebody talk and they start sharing your dreams, they are opening up widely to you, and it is a humbling experience. Actually, when I think of the times when folks have shared their dreams with me, who sometimes they might not have known me for a very long time, and I don't take that for granted anymore.
Mhm. What keeps us from developing more intimate relationships?
Well, I think one of the things is our busyness. It's a lot of times it's not for lack of wanting. It's just for lack of having time. Because if we don't do this in an intentional manner, it will never happen. When I first started in Hispanic ministries, that was one of the first things I lifted up. We have to be intentional. If you really want to connect with your neighbors that happen to be Hispanic, then you have to be intentional about being where they're at. You have to be intentional about providing, in some cases, language in Spanish rather than in English. So one has to be a lot more humble, and one has to be willing to learn from somebody else, and also to be curious about somebody else. And that's a lot of times what's lacking, is just this curiosity, or just in general wanting to know about others. And again, we live in a busy world, but there are ways to do that, and if we do them intentionally, I think we can uh, brighten, widen our perception of our neighbors, whoever they might be.
Wow, fabulous, fabulous. So earlier on, I mentioned that one of the things playing in the background are some of the more poignant recent examples, though not new, may I say, of injustice, language that expresses racial hatred, animus, supremacy, sometimes those that are designated to be safety and peace officers, i.e. the police. And let's take George Floyd as an example, dramatic though it is. Many of us know that it may not be 8 minutes and 46 seconds, but that's not as isolated a kind of thing as many people have assumed heretofore. And thus the broad base of people that have responded saying something is wrong with this picture. Often that's been cast, Sam, in a sort of the black and white paradigm, though there are a number of writers and theologians who've talked about injustices toward, and I quote now, black and brown bodies. So I want to speak directly out of your own background and cultural experience. I mean, George Floyd's laying there, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. I mean, do you see Sam Rodriguez or other people that's possible, that kind of thing has happened?
Unfortunately, I do. Just an example, I have been warned, if you will, about some areas, some counties here in Ohio where we have our churches to be careful, extra careful when you go through those places, because you, as a Hispanic, can certainly be a target, and so that certainly happens a lot. The fact that it is so blatant now, as you said with George Floyd, is what really bothers me to my core, and makes me feel like we have gone backwards instead of forwards in our racial relationships in this country that used to be, or at least at a certain degree, recognized for the fact that we are a country of immigrants, that the only people that are from here are our Native American brothers and sisters.
Wow. Sometimes when the conversation's going and so many of the faces are African American, shall we say, do you feel that by any audience, the media or otherwise, that there is a neglect of things that are happening to Hispanic or Latinx sisters and brothers?
As you mentioned earlier, I think I'm hearing more and more the combining of those two groups, which I feel is really helpful, because we certainly are aware of what's been going on for many months at the border with how people are being treated and caged up. And that continues to happen, but you don't hear about it as much. And that is saddening. That has not changed. And but for the most part, is when you said that, I do realize that thankfully that it is being, they are putting the fact that these two groups that are the biggest minorities, if you will, in this country are being targeted in one way or another, and are victims many times of great injustice.
I suspect that if ever, I know you're the safest of drivers and you've never had any infractions of the law, but I'm hunching that you've had some experience when maybe legitimately you've been stopped, let's say over the speed limit or tail light or something, as we all have at some point. At least I have. I've the foot's gotten heavy on the pedal, and the experience of being quizzed as to sort of, quote, where are you from, unquote.
It's kind of interesting. I've been fortunate in true discrimination or prejudice. I can only count on maybe one hand.
Good.
And as we shared earlier, growing up in El Paso, I had to leave El Paso before I actually knew what discrimination was as a teenager, traveling to a youth camp from El Paso to Paris, Texas, which is probably about 700 miles. And we went through one city. We were a van of Hispanic brown people, and we went to a restaurant and we were going to stop there and eat. So we all get off. We're very hungry. We're waiting for them to sit us, and we're standing. And I don't know, it must have been 15, 20 minutes when our leader finally said, let's go, we're leaving. And I was shocked by this. I was like, what's going on? I'm hungry, I wanna eat. And of course, it wasn't until later, I was maybe in the 7th grade, it wasn't until later that I realized that the reason he did that was because we were not going to be fed and we needed to go to another restaurant. So that is actually the first memory of any kind of discrimination that I had felt or received in my life.
Mhm. And that
And
was, you were seventh grade, 12, 13 years old. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, and outside of El Paso, I don't remember ever really feeling that way or feeling that I was being discriminated when I was in this very encapsulated
Right.
culture that is El Paso and Juarez.
But once you left El Paso,
Yes, yes,
some things changed.
things changed.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
that's right.
Yes,
That's right.
sir.
So anyway, this conversation is entitled "Faith and Works." I have a variety of guests on, and I don't want to make it sound like I've been doing it for years. And so, what's the work for people of faith to move us forward in cultural competency, in being anti-racist, in challenging white supremacy, in being better neighbors? What does that work look like? If you were doing a workshop or training or consulting with a congregation that wanted to wrestle with these issues, how would you tease that out for them to claim what the work is?
One of the first things that, and it's something that I've learned over the years, is that in order for us to be truly willing to learn, we have to humble ourselves. And nobody likes to talk about humility.
Mm.
We want everybody to see us as strong leaders, as strong people of faith. But humility does not come into the picture very often, or for my I experience, often enough through any kind of preaching or teaching. And so that's the beginning for me, is to be humble and be willing to learn from other people, no matter who they are, where they're from, what their social economic status is, or any of those things. The other thing is you have to be curious and you have to be motivated to want to learn. So if you go into a training that you were forced to go into, a good percentage of those people are not going to be very happy. And quite frankly, it has been stated that a lot of times this type of training that is forced upon employees backfires because it is imposed on them rather than them saying, oh yeah, I want to learn more about being culturally competent. So those are for me, the two main factors for the beginning of truly opening up your mind and your willingness to have relationships with others, to the point to where you're intentionally doing things, whether it's reading a book on cultural competency, whether it's watching a movie from another country, or whether it's going to a training.
Wow. Wow. So two keys for you, I'm just reiterating: humility and motivation.
Yes, sir.
You have to have the will. That's fabulous. That's very helpful. As we close, what's your dream for the United Methodist Church?
Oh my goodness. That is a good question. My dream is for the United Methodist Church to become a multi-ethnic church. The growth in our population is exactly from all other folks other than Caucasian this day and age. And as we all know, there are many cities and states who are becoming minority majority.
Hmm.
The church, the United Methodist Church, has a great opportunity in this time and space that we're in right now. We have a great opportunity to take what we're learning, to prepare ourselves and our churches and our leadership to be more engaged with their neighbors. It's about community. It's not so much about the church. The church is the community, and we're called to transform the community, not so much the church. So my dream is that we do not take this history that we're living through right now and make it into a fad. That in 2010 we
Wow.
were so interested in multi-ethnic churches, we were so interested in being culturally competent, and we did it for a quadrennium, and then we forgot after that quadrennium how important that was. This has to be a part of our DNA as United Methodist people in order for us to truly be the church for the world, and most importantly, be the church for this country.
Well, thank you very much. Friends, I've been talking with Sam Rodriguez, a member of the West Ohio Conference staff. Brother Sam, you've been a blessing. Thank you for sharing your mind and your heart. And we hope to grow rich together, learning together. Blessings and peace.
Thank you for the opportunity.
My privilege.